New Hampshire primary results last night. I don't know how much you can read into these in one way or another, because for the Democrats, it wasn't even a primary. No delegates will be awarded from there. So it freed up a lot of people to sign up to run in the Republican Party. More relevantly, it allowed for independents, some of whom might vote in a Democratic primary, to vote in the Republican primary. Even with that caveat, Trump, I think, received more votes in the Republican primary last night than any other winner of the Republican primary in the past. Now, it's also really rare. I don't ever remember any New Hampshire primary having only two candidates declared.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any recollection of that? So,
it's never. I mean, because we're looking back at these figures here. First of all, this was the biggest gap in independents and Republicans between those two candidates that we've seen over the past election cycles.
Gap in who they chose.
Yes. Trump won Republicans by 49 points. Nikki Haley won independents by 22 points, and it was high turnout. Around, I think, 300,000 people turned out. Very
high turnout for the Republicans, but
that split between independents and Republican voters is by far the highest we've seen in a long period of time.
But it's hard to assess that because you don't know how many of those independent voters would normally have voted in a Democratic primary.
Exactly, because if you're going to the polls, you're a New Hampshire person that cares about voting, and you're an unaffiliated voter, right? There's two ballots you can pick. You can pick a Republican one or a Democratic one. And the Democratic one was not going to make a difference. It was symbolic. So you're going to pick the Republican one, right? And if you hate Trump, you'll vote Nikki Haley. She was set up with, and by the way, Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, was campaigning for her this whole time. Like, not a religious state, college-educated state. This was the perfect opportunity for her to actually win a state. And this means she won't win any. I don't think she'll win any states.
She won't win any states. The real question, though, is how long she'll stay in the race. Here is Donald Trump. Oh, I should say, well, here is Nikki Haley in her concession speech.
She's spinning it.
She's spinning. I mean, the real question is
just a flesh wound speech.
How long is she going to stay in the race?
Monty Python.
Because this is the thing to think about here. She probably is one of the few also-rans, as it were, in this Republican primary who is not anticipating a job in the Trump administration. She must realize that he's not going to pick her for vice president. And certainly she's had a run in the administration. And then the question becomes, well, how much tolerance, what's the agenda of her backers? If she cannot win in this election, she seems to be able to maybe hurt Donald Trump in the general just by existing. Because here she was last night. But listen, do we have that last line where we hear her audience members? Yeah, this is going to make it. This is the part that is interesting to me.
And the question is, who's going to fix it? With Donald Trump, Republicans have lost almost every competitive election. We lost the Senate. We lost the House. We lost the White House. We lost in 2018. We lost in 2020. And we lost in 2022. The worst kept secret in politics is how badly the Democrats want to run against Donald Trump. They know Trump is the only Republican in the country who Joe Biden can defeat.
Okay, and
that's true.
The idea that you have Republican, I mean, I have every reason to believe that most of the people in that room are Republicans, right? They're obviously anti-Trump Republicans. But just that you have someone around there who is in the Republican Party who is forcing some Republicans to yell that Trump is a loser, I think that to the extent that anything can hurt Donald Trump, I think that's the type of thing that hurts Donald Trump. And then the only other thing that can hurt Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And this speech from Donald Trump that came very shortly after that, very different from the Iowa speech. And, you know,
Tim Scott's doing his best Chris Christie.
Without a doubt. And this speech was weird for a couple of reasons. One, Trump brought up Vivek like within minutes of this speech to do. He said, "I have time."
He's giving us a lot of money.
You got only 1 minute
to introduce him to rap or something like that. He's waiting in the wings.
He brought him up to like just kiss Trump's ring, and I think it was like his way. My guess is that the sale was like, Vivek speaks to the kids, and also he's not white.
He's a great salesman.
Yeah.
And so you want him on national television because this is you know the sort of the launch of the general campaign.
Well, they're hoping that's the case.
Well, that's the theory, anyways. They operate under that theory.
Let's leave with the guy who only went down in the polls.
We'll bring Vivek out there, and but he's only got a minute. And this is and Vivek is doing this because he wants to run for something, I think, in Ohio. And he wants Trump to come and campaign for him. And so this is what's going on here. But listen to Trump. This is not what his campaign would have wanted him to do as like the opening salvo of his general campaign. Because this is the type of thing that turns off those sort of like semi-low information, you know, like semi-involved voter who doesn't feel comfortable with how rude Trump is. Go ahead.
And we won by 21 points, and it was great. And today, I have to tell you, it was very interesting because I said, wow, what a great victory. But then somebody ran up to the stage all dressed up nicely when it was at 7. But now I just walked up and it's at 14. But she ran up when it was 7. And, you know, we have to do what's good for our party. And she was up and I said, wow, she's doing like a speech like she won. She didn't win, she lost. And, you know, last week we had a little bit of a problem. And if you remember, Ron was very upset because she ran up and she pretended she won Iowa. And I looked around, I said, didn't she come in third? Yeah, she came in third. And then I looked at the polls. She was talking about most winnability, who's going to win, and I had one put up. I don't know if you see it, but I have one put up. We've won almost every single poll in the last 3 months against crooked Joe Biden, almost every poll. And she doesn't win those polls. And she doesn't win those. This is not your typical victory speech, but let's not have somebody take a victory when she had a very bad night. She had a very bad night. And you have the now very unpopular governor of this state. This guy, he's got to be on something. I've never seen anybody with energy.
Taking drugs.
He's like hopscotch. And
what?
You know, I'm watching this
implying
guy
that he's on like taking coke.
What does hopscotch mean?
He's hopped up. He's hopped up.
Hopscotch.
Yeah,
he's hopped up on drugs.
Everyone knows that.
Never thought I'd hear Trump say the
Studio
word.
54, you're playing hopscotch.
Yeah.
Hopscotching.
As I sniff. I mean, hey, no shame, but
this is the beginning of the speech, and you know, this is the type
Fight
of
them
thing
on the beaches.
that you know the Biden campaign is praying for and needs, because they're hoping that Trump, agitated, is going to remind people, you know, in part, why they didn't want Trump before. And you have to remember, just statistically speaking, more of Trump's voters have passed away, honestly.
from COVID.
Well, I mean,
old age.
COVID and old age, I mean, just statistically speaking, than theoretically Biden ones. And so this is what the Biden campaign wants. Whether they're right or not, I'll be able to tell you in 11 months, but 10 months, I guess. But as to whether Nikki Haley stays in the race, it really is just a question of what is the agenda of the donors.
Yes.
Do they want to, are there Republican donors who think if this hurts Donald Trump in the general election to keep Nikki Haley in until Super Tuesday, maybe they'll fund her to do it? Because if she thinks that she's not going to get anywhere anyways until 2028, this might be in her best interest.
I think so. And it's a really unique situation this year because for some reason, Iowa and New Hampshire are way ahead of South Carolina. Because I remember
Nevada has its caucus, but Nikki Haley's not participating in it.
Right. So it's just I think it's kind of a different year in that way, right? I mean, like the gap between, I don't remember the gap being this large between Iowa and South Carolina. I could be wrong about that. Or New Hampshire and South Carolina for that matter. But that's, I think, the shelf life for her. If she's going to lose by 20 plus points, I think, in her home state. And then when you get to Super Tuesday, a short time after that, the Republican primary process is set up, and it's increasingly so that it gets wrapped up quickly. California, for the first time this year, is a winner-take-all state. That's 169 delegates, because the Republican, like MAGA Trump people made it that way. They wanted Trump to be able to wrap it up quickly. So, I mean...
The Republican primary, I should say, also has always been much more geared towards a winner-take-all thing than a split delegation. In other words, if you get 40% within the primary, you get 40% of the delegates. It's not like that in the Republican primary. So there's a couple in the Democratic, but the vast majority of the Republican primary process is winner-take-all.
Right,
So,
and even more so this year, point being. So, like, her window is just a few weeks, and then we're starting to wrap up the Nikki Haley experience.
We will go through a lot of the exit polling, but again, such a weird year in terms of who made up the electorate. Very hard to sort of like make any assessments of this whatsoever, as far as I can tell.
Except one thing, that Republican pollsters are looking at how well she did with independents and how poorly Trump did, and they're freaking out a little bit about the general election.
And again, it's hard to know like how many of those, but they may have more granular details than we do on those exit polling. We should also say Biden won, but his name had to be written in. He was not participating in this primary because it was not an official. There will be no delegates awarded, but he still won in a big fashion relative to the other write-ins. The only thing that I'm interested in the New Hampshire one is that there's something like 20,000, maybe 13,000 write-ins that have not been counted, 7,000 that just seem to be sort of other. Now, I've seen accountings of the write-ins like with candidates who have had 29 write-ins. So it's possible, I don't know what the New Hampshire rules are, but it's possible that ceasefire is in a lot of those 7,000 ballots, but they don't count it because it's not a person, maybe? I don't know, but we'll keep our eyes open for that.
I hope a reporter gets their hands on how many ceasefire write-ins there were.